He writes, my wife and I have the vast majority of our net worth invested in Berkshire and in shares of the Sequoia Fund. Mr. Buffett, you have endorsed the Sequoia Fund on more than a few occasions. Recently, the Sequoia Fund has been in the news because of its large position in Valeant Pharmaceuticals. Mr. Munger has termed Valeant's business model highly immoral. Mr. Buffett, do you agree with Mr. Munger's assessment? Have your views about Sequoia Fund changed? Also, as you know, Sequoia is an admirer and large holder of Berkshire stock.
Yeah, in a sense, I'm the father of Sequoia Fund in that when I was closing up my partnership at the end of 1969, I was giving back a lot of money to partners, and these people had trusted me, and they wanted to know what they should do with their money. And we helped out those who wanted to put it in municipal bonds for a few months. Bill Scott and I stayed around and helped those people come up with those, but most of them were equity-oriented type investors. And we said there were two people that we admired enormously in the investment business, not simply because they were terrific investors, but they were terrific people. And they would be the kind of people that you'd make trustee of your will. So those two, one of whom is in the room, Sandy Gottesman, our director, and one was Sandy and one was Bill Ruane. They were friends themselves. So Sandy took on a number of our clients, a number of our partners, and they became clients and very happy clients of his, and I'll bet some of them are still clients, or their children or grandchildren are to this day. Others went with Bill. A lot of them went with both of them, actually. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the majority, who had a lot of money, gave some to Sandy and gave some to Bill. But Bill, we had a lot of people whose total funds were really not of a size that made them economic individual clients. And so Bill, who would not have otherwise set up a fund, Bill said, I'll set up a fund, and it actually had an office in Omaha. John Harding, who used to work for me, became the employee here, and a number of our ex-partners, my ex-partners, joined Sequoia Fund as a way to find an outstanding investment manager, like I say, both for ability and for integrity, and could deploy small sums with him. And Bill ran Sequoia until I think roughly 2005 when he died, and did a fantastic job. And even now, if you take the record from inception to now, with the troubles they've had recently, I don't know of a mutual fund in the United States that has a better record. There probably is one, maybe or two, but it's far better than the S&P, and you won't find many records that go for 30 or 40 years that are better than the S&P. So Bill did a great job for people. And Bill died in 2005, and the record continued to be good until a year or so ago. And at that time, the management company, or the manager, I should say, took an unusually large position in Valeant, and despite the objection of some people on the board, not only maintained that position, but actually increased it after a fair amount of doubt had been expressed by the board about the advisability of doing that. The record, like I say, to date, still from when started, is significantly better than average. My understanding is that the manager who made the decision on Valeant is no longer running the operation, and that other people at Ruane Cunniff are doing so, and I have every reason to believe that I know that they're very smart, decent people who are good, are probably way better than average analysts in terms of Wall Street. So I think it was a very unfortunate period when the manager got overly entranced with a business model, which if you, I watched the Senate hearings a couple of days ago when Senator Collins and Senator McCaslin interrogated three people from Valeant, and it was not a pretty picture. In my view, the business model of Valeant was enormously flawed. It had been touted to us. We had several people who urged us strongly to buy Valeant, wanted us to meet Pearson, all that sort of thing. But it illustrated a principle that Pete Keywood, I think, said many, many years ago. He said, if you're looking for a manager, find somebody that's intelligent, energetic, and has integrity. And he said, if they don't have the last, be sure they don't have the first two. If you've got somebody who lacks integrity, you want to be dumb and lazy, you know. And if you get an intelligent, energetic guy or woman who is pursuing a course of action which, if put on the front page, would make you very unhappy, you can get in a lot of trouble. It may take a while. But Charlie and I have seen, and we're not remotely perfect at this, I don't mean that, but we've seen patterns. Pattern recognition gets very important in evaluating humans and businesses. And the pattern recognition isn't 100%, and none of the patterns exactly repeat themselves, but there are certain things in business and securities markets that we have seen over and over and that frequently come to a bad end, but frequently look extremely good in the short run. One which I talked about last year, I'm not referring to value in this regard, is the chain letter scheme, the disguised chain letter. You're going to see chain letters the rest of your life. Nobody calls them chain letters because that has a connotation that will scare you off, but they're disguised chain letters, and many of the schemes in Wall Street that are designed to fool people have that particular aspect to it. And there were patterns at Valeant that I think, certainly if you go and watch those Senate hearings, I think you'll decide that there were patterns there that really should have been picked up on, and it's been very painful to the people of Sequoia. And I personally think that the people that are running Sequoia now are able people, and I'll get into in a second the difficulty of managing money. But first I'll give Charlie a chance to comment on this.
Well, I totally agree with you that Sequoia, as reconstituted, is a reputable investment fund, and that the manager, as reconstituted, is a reputable investment advisor. And I've got quite a few friends and clients that use Roy and Kniff, and I've advised them to stay with the place as reconstituted. And I believe you've done the same thing, haven't you?
Right.
So we trust, we think the whole thing is fixed. Now, Valeant, of course, was a sewer, and those who created it deserve all the opprobrium that they got.
In a few minutes we'll break, but I think it almost ties in with this last question. If we could put slide 3 up. I promised, some years ago I made a wager, and I promised to report before the lunch how the wager was coming out. And I've been doing that regularly, but it seems appropriate, since it's developed this far, to point out a rather obvious lesson, which was what I hoped to drive home to some degree by offering to make the wager originally. Incidentally, when I offered to make the wager, namely that somebody could pick out 5 hedge funds and I would take the unmanaged S&P index used by Vanguard Fund, and I would bet that over a 10-year period that the unmanaged index would beat these 5 funds who were all being managed, presumably. They could pick any 5 funds. that were managed by people who were charging incredible sums to people because of their supposed expertise. And fortunately, there's an organization called, or at least if you go to the internet, if you put in longbets.org, it's a terribly interesting website. You can have a lot of fun with it because people take the opposite side of various propositions that have a long tail to them and make bets as to the outcome, and then they both each side gives their reasons. And you can go to that website and you can find bets about, what population will be doing 15 years from now, or all kinds of things. And hedge funds, these were funds of funds. In other words, there was one hedge fund at the top, and then that manager picked out who he thought were the best managers underneath, and then bought into these other funds in turn, so that the 5 funds of funds represent maybe 100 or 200 hedge funds underneath. Now bear in mind that the hedge fund, the fellow making the bet, was picking out funds where the manager on top was getting paid perhaps 0.5% a year plus a cut of the profits for merely picking out who he thought were the best managers underneath, who in turn were getting paid maybe 1.5 or 2% plus a cut of the funds on profits. But certainly the guy at the top was incentivized to try and pick out great funds, and at the next level, those people were presumably incentivized too. So the result is, after 8 years and several hundred hedge fund managers being involved, is that now the totally unmanaged fund by Vanguard with very, very, very minimal costs is now 40-some points ahead of the group of hedge funds. Now that may sound like a terrible result for the hedge funds, but it's not a terrible result for the hedge fund managers. These managers, you've got this top level manager that's charging probably 0.5%, I don't know that for sure. And down below you've got managers that are probably charging 1.5 to 2%. So if you have a couple percentage points sliced off every year, that is a lot of money. We have 2 managers at Berkshire that each managed $9 billion for us. They both ran hedge funds before. If they had a 2 and 20 arrangement with Berkshire, which is not uncommon in the hedge fund world, they would be getting $180 million each, merely for breathing annually. It's a compensation scheme that is unbelievable to me. And that's one reason I made this bet. But what I'd like you to do is for a moment imagine that in this room we have the entire, you people own all of America. That all the stocks in America are owned by this group. You are the Berkshire 18,000 or whatever it is that have somehow managed to accumulate all the wealth in the country. And let's assume we just divide it down the middle. And on this side, we put half the people, half of all the investment capital in the world, and that capital is what a certain presidential candidate might call low energy. In fact, they have no energy at all. They buy half of everything that exists in the investment world, 50%, everyone on this side. And so now half of it is owned by these no energy people. They don't look at stock prices. They don't turn on business channels. They don't read the Wall Street Journal. They don't do anything. They are a slovenly group that just sits for year after year after year owning half of the country, half of America's business. Now, what's their result going to be? Their result is going to be exactly average as how American business does, because they own half of all of it. They have no expenses, no nothing. Now, what's going to happen with the other half? The other half are what we call the hyperactives. And the hyperactives, their gross result is also going to be half, right? They can't, the whole has to be the sum of the parts here, and this group by definition can't change from its half of the ultimate investment results. This half is going to have the same gross results. They're going to have the same results as the no energy people, and they're also going to have terrific expenses because they're all going to be moving around, hiring hedge funds, hiring consultants, paying lots of commissions and everything. And that half as a group has to do worse than this half. The people who don't do anything have to do better than the people that are trying to do better. I mean, that's simple. And I hoped through making this bet to actually create a little example of that. But that offer was open to anybody. And I would make incidentally the same offer now, except being around in 10 years to collect gets a little more problematic as we go through life. But it seems so elementary. But I will guarantee you that no endowment fund, no public pension fund, no extremely rich person wants to sit in that part of the auditorium. They just can't believe that because they have billions of dollars to invest, that they can't go out and hire somebody who will do better than average. I hear from them all the time. So this group over here, supposedly sophisticated people, generally richer people, hire consultants, and no consultant in the world is going to tell you just buy an S&P index fund and sit for the next 50 years. You don't get to be a consultant that way, and you certainly don't get an annual fee that way. So the consultant's got every motivation in the world to tell you, this year I think we should concentrate more on international stocks, or this year this manager's particularly good on the short side. And so they come in and they talk for hours, and you pay them a large fee, and they always suggest something other than just sitting on your rear end and participating in American business without cost. And then those consultants, after they get their fees, they in turn recommend to you other people who charge fees which, as you can see over a period of time, cumulatively eat up capital like crazy. So I would suggest that what I felt sure, I didn't feel sure because nothing, can't tell for sure about any 10-year period, but I certainly felt very probable or I wouldn't have stuck my neck out. It just demonstrates so dramatically. I've talked to huge pension funds and I've taken them through the math, and when I leave, they go out and hire a bunch of consultants and pay them a lot of money. And it's just unbelievable. And the consultants always change the recommendations a little bit from year to year. They can't change them 100% because then it didn't look like they knew what they were doing the year before. So they tweak them from year to year, and they come in and they have lots of charts and PowerPoint presentations, and they recommend people who in turn are going to charge them a lot of money, and they say, well, you can only get the best talent by paying 2 and 20 or something of the sort. And the flow of money from the hyperactive to what I call the helpers is dramatic, while this group over here sits here and absolutely gets the record of American industry. So I hope you'll realize that for the population as a whole, American business has done wonderfully, and the net result of hiring professional management, is a huge minus. And at the bookstore, we have a little book called Where Are the Customer's Yachts, written by Fred Schwed. I read it when I was about 10 years old. Been updated it hadn't been updated, but new editions have been put out a few times, but the basic lessons are there. That lesson is told in that book from 1940. It's so obvious, and yet all the commercial push is behind telling you that you've got to think about doing something today that's different than you did yesterday. You don't have to do that. You just have to sit back and let American industry do its job for you. Charlie, do you have anything to add to my sermon?
Well, you're talking to a bunch of people who have solved their problem by buying Berkshire Hathaway. That worked even better. And there have been a few of these managers
Sure.
who've actually succeeded. There are a few in the universities who are really good, but It's a tiny group of people. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack.
And when I was given the job of naming two in 1969, I knew two. I knew a couple of others. Charlie wasn't interested in managing more money then, and my friend Walter Schloss he did not scale up well, although he had a fabulous record over 45 years or thereabouts. But, that was all I could come up with at that time. And fortunately, I did have a couple. And the people who went with Sequoia Fund have been well served if they stayed for the whole period. But the people, there's been far, far, far more money made by people in Wall Street through salesmanship abilities than through investment abilities. There are a few people out there that are going to have an outstanding investment record, but there are very few of them, and the people you pay to have identify them don't know how to identify them, and they do know how to sell you, and that's my message